A restaurant owner opens his doors to a homeless grandmother and child on a stormy night. But what happens after he lets them stay will leave you, questioning everything you thought was real. Strange whispers, empty rooms that are never truly empty, and a terrifying secret that changes his life forever. Was it an act of kindness? Or the biggest mistake of his life? Stay with me until the very end, because the shocking truth will haunt you long after the story is over. And do not forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss the next chilling tale. The rain fell hard against the restaurant windows. The streets were nearly empty, except for two figures huddled under the awning. An elderly woman clutched a small child close, both shivering from the cold. The owner, Daniel, wiped down the last table. He glanced outside and froze. The old woman's eyes met his through the glass. They were pale, almost too pale, like mist in the night. The child hid his face in her shawl, but Daniel noticed his thin hands trembling. Something inside Daniel stirred. He unlocked the door. "Come inside," he said. The bell above the door rang, but strangely, no sound echoed. The warmth of the restaurant wrapped around them. Yet Daniel felt a chill on his neck. The old woman whispered her thanks, her voice rasping as though dragged from a deep well. Daniel served them hot soup, the steam rising in the dim light. The child lifted his head. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw shadows ripple across the boy's face like flickering smoke. He blinked, but the image vanished. The old woman asked quietly, "May we stay the night? Just one night." Daniel hesitated, his gut tightening. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second thudding in his ears. Finally, he nodded. He led them to a small storage room with a cot and blankets. As he turned to leave, the child spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, steady and far too deep for his small frame. "Thank you, Daniel." Daniel froze. He had not told them his name. Daniel's throat went dry. The child's words echoed in the small storage room. Heavy and unnatural, he forced a smile and backed out, closing the door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking felt louder than the rain outside. Daniel leaned against the wall, his heart pounding. How had the boy known his name? He had not introduced himself. He had not worn a name tag, and yet the child had spoken it with certainty. Daniel tried to shake it off. He told himself it was a coincidence, but that night, as he locked up the restaurant, he noticed something strange. The front windows were fogged, though the heaters were off. In the mist on the glass, words were written with a finger. "Do not send us away." Daniel's pulse raced. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, as if scratched by someone trembling. He turned quickly toward the storage room. The restaurant was silent, far too silent. Even the old clock had stopped ticking. He walked down the hall, each step echoing louder than the last. The door to the storage room was slightly open. Inside, the cot was empty. The blankets lay folded neatly, untouched, and in the corner, carved into the wooden wall, were the same words again. "Do not send us away." Daniel staggered back from the wall. The carved letters looked fresh, splinters still clinging to the grooves. His breath quickened. He knew the woman and child had no tools, and yet the marks were deep, etched with force. The air in the storage room grew heavy. The scent of damp earth filled his lungs, though the floor was spotless. Daniel heard a faint whisper. It came from behind him, slow, deliberate, almost like a chant. He spun around. No one stood there. But in the reflection of the small metal sink, he saw something move, a shape, tall and thin, lingering just beyond his shoulder. The light bulb flickered. The reflection tilted its head. Though Daniel had not moved, cold sweat slid down his spine. Suddenly, the door slammed shut on its own. Darkness swallowed the room, and in the pitch black, a child's voice rose, soft, calm. Close to his ear, Daniel's knees nearly buckled. The child's whisper was so close, he felt the warmth of breath on his ear. But when he swung his arm through the air, there was nothing. Nothing but the thick weight of silence. His heart thudded against his ribs like a hammer. He fumbled for the light switch. Click. The bulb flickered, back on. The room was empty, the cot still, untouched. The wall carvings deeper than before. Letters gouged so violently the wood looked torn. "Do not send us away!" Daniel staggered backward. He needed to leave. He needed air. But when he yanked the door handle, it would not budge. It felt as though an invisible hand pressed it shut from the other side. Then, the child's voice came again, this time not near his ear, but everywhere, inside the walls, inside his head. "You invited us in." Daniel's vision blurred. The walls seemed to ripple, the wood bending like soft clay, and in the shifting grain of the wood, faces appeared. Pale, hollow-eyed faces, dozens of them, mouths open in silent screams. Daniel stumbled back, his body trembling. He pressed himself against the cold sink, breath shallow, hands shaking, one face in the wood slowly pushed forward. It was the old woman, her pale eyes opened wide, her lips parted. "Your life belongs to us now." The old woman's face pressed further from the wall, stretching the wood as if it were flesh. Her hand pushed through next, thin and bony, nails sharp like splinters. Daniel stumbled toward the cot, grabbing a chair for defense. The air turned icy, his breath spilling white clouds. From behind him, the child's voice echoed again. "You opened the door, Daniel. You chose us." Daniel swung the chair wildly, but it struck only empty air. The shadows along the floor thickened, curling like smoke. They rose upward, surrounding him, circling like predators in the shifting darkness. The boy appeared, but he did not look like a child anymore. His body was small, but his eyes burned like hollow lanterns. And when he smiled, Daniel felt every hair on his body rise. The boy's teeth were sharp, too sharp. The restaurant's lights flickered once more, and in that brief flash, Daniel saw every table, every chair, filled with pale figures, customers who were not there seconds ago, all staring at him, all whispering in unison, "Do not send us away." Daniel's legs shook, but he forced himself to stand tall. The pale figures sat motionless at the tables, their whispering a low, endless drone. The air smelled of wet soil and ash. Though no fire had burned, he gripped the chair tighter, knuckles white. But his hand felt numb. The boy stepped closer. Each footstep made no sound. Yet Daniel's ears rang as if struck by a bell. "Do you know why we came here?" the boy asked. His voice was layered, many voices speaking through him. Men, women, children, all speaking as one. Daniel's lips trembled. "What do you want from me?" The boy's smile widened, stretching too far. "You gave us food. You gave us shelter. Now you must give us more." The old woman's face, still pressed from the wall, tilted unnaturally. Her eyes rolled white. "You cannot turn us away, Daniel." "None of us ever leave." The lights above began to hum, glowing brighter until Daniel had to shield his eyes. The figures at the tables rose as one, their movements stiff, jerky, like broken marionettes. They all turned their heads toward him. The whispering grew louder, sharper until it became a scream. Daniel's chair slipped from his hands. He fell to his knees, clutching his ears, but the voices drilled deeper inside his skull. And then, sudden silence. He opened his eyes. The restaurant was empty. No figures, no boy, no old woman, just him. Alone on the floor, or so he thought. Because in the faint reflection of the restaurant window, someone stood behind him, smiling. Daniel's heart slammed in his chest. He dared not turn around. The reflection in the glass was clear, too clear. A tall figure loomed behind him. Its smile stretched unnaturally wide. Its teeth were thin, jagged like shards of broken glass. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. Slowly, he turned, but the space behind him was empty. The restaurant lights flickered once. then steadied. The silence was suffocating. Daniel pressed a hand against the window to steady himself. The glass felt warm, as if touched by fire. Then, his reflection blinked. Daniel froze. He had not blinked. The reflection smiled at him with his own face. It lifted a hand, pressing it against the glass, mirroring his, except the reflection's nails were long. Dark, curling like claws, Daniel stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The sound crashed through the restaurant. But the reflection remained, grinning. Then, in a voice that was Daniel's own, it spoke. "You belong to us now." The glass began to crack. Tiny fractures spread outward from the reflection's hand, jagged lines crawling across the window. Daniel's breath caught as the cracks deepened, splitting wider. The reflection's hand began to push through the glass, bending reality like water. Daniel turned to run, but the front door of the restaurant slammed shut, locking tight. The lights flickered violently, shadows crawling along the walls, and from the storage room, the child's deep voice returned, "Do not send us away." Daniel's voice echoed like a command from a cavern. "Sit down. The table is waiting." The man's grip tightened on the skillet. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to resist, to run, but there was no door, no escape. The tables stood ready, chairs perfectly aligned, candles flickering though no flame had been lit. One chair at the center remained empty, waiting. The pale crowd parted in silence, creating a narrow path. The boy's voice slithered through the air. "Your place has been saved." The man shook his head, backing against the wall. "No, I will not sit." The candles flickered harder, flames stretching unnaturally tall, shadows bent across the floor. Wrapping around his ankles like chains, he swung the skillet, desperate, striking the wall. The iron shattered into rust, crumbling in his hands like old paper. The boy tilted his head, his eyes glowing faint. "You cannot break what does not exist." Daniel stepped closer, his pale hand rising, fingers curling like hooks. His whisper was no longer his own. It carried the weight of many voices. "Sit, eat, become." The man's knees buckled as the shadows dragged him forward. The empty chair pulled him in, wood groaning as though it were alive. The moment he touched it, the whispers ceased. All was silent. Every pale face leaned forward. And then, as the man sat, the table before him filled with food, steaming plates. Golden bread, roasted meat glistening with juice. The smell was intoxicating, almost holy. His stomach twisted with hunger. And in that silence, the boy leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Eat, and you will never leave." The food shimmered on the table, its steam curling into strange shapes. Faces formed in the smoke, mouths that opened and closed in silent cries. The man gagged, turning his head away. "I will not eat this." The boy's smile never faltered. "You are already eating," he whispered. The man looked down in horror. His hands were not empty. They gripped a piece of meat, half-bitten, blood dripping onto the tablecloth. His jaw ached. His lips tasted of iron. He had no memory of lifting it, no memory of chewing. The pale figures leaned closer, eyes wide, their whispers rising again. "Eat, eat, eat." The man dropped the food, his hands shaking. It did not fall. The flesh writhed in his palms, clinging like a living thing, forcing itself toward his mouth. He tried to throw it aside, but it melted into his skin, searing hot, burning like coal. He screamed, slamming his fists against the table. The boy leaned closer, his voice like a knife sliding through his ear. "Every bite feeds us. Every bite binds you. Soon, you will be part of the feast." Daniel's pale hand reached across the table, resting on the man's arm. "Do not fight it," he whispered. "It is easier if you swallow." The man's throat tightened as the taste of blood and ash filled his mouth again. This time, he had not moved at all, yet something inside him was chewing. The man clawed at his mouth, desperate to stop the unseen force. But his jaw moved on its own, grinding, swallowing, obeying. Each bite sent a chill through his body, as if pieces of him were being stripped away. The pale crowd leaned closer, their eyes gleaming. They were feeding through him. The boy's voice wrapped around him like chains. Good, good. You are becoming. The man slammed his fists against the table. Splintering the wood, I will not be yours, he roared. The candles flared high, shadows thrashing along the walls like black waves. The boy's smile faltered for the first time. You resist. Stronger than most. The man staggered to his feet, his breath ragged, his body trembling. The food on the table blackened instantly, rotting, maggots spilling across the plates. The pale figures hissed, recoiling as smoke rose from the ruined feast. The boy's voice dropped, darker, colder. You cannot stop what you already swallowed. The man looked down at his trembling hands. His veins were turning black, spreading up his arms like ink. The whispers grew louder, not outside, but inside his skull, 100 voices gnawed at his mind, fighting for space. The boy stepped closer, his glowing eyes unblinking. Do not resist, and it will be painless. Resist, and we will take you piece by piece. The man's knees buckled. His own voice began to whisper against his will, in rhythm with the others. Do not send us away. But in the back of his mind, buried beneath the voices, a spark remained, a thought, a refusal, a single word repeating louder than the whispers. No. Do you want me to continue with part 18, where the man tries to use that? The man clung to that single word. No. It burned in his chest like a flame in the dark. The whispers pressed harder, a tidal wave of voices crushing his mind. Do not send us away. Do not send us away. He staggered, gripping the table for balance, veins pulsing black under his skin. But still, he whispered again, no. The crowd hissed as one, recoiling as if struck. The boy's smile twitched, cracks forming across his pale face. You cannot resist forever, the boy growled, his voice layered with 100 others. The man clenched his fists, forcing his trembling body upright. I do not belong to you. The candles shattered, exploding into sparks. The restaurant walls groaned, wood bending inward as though the building itself was alive. The pale figures shuddered, their forms flickering like smoke struggling to hold shape. Daniel stepped forward from the crowd, his face twisted in both sorrow and hunger. You cannot win, Daniel rasped. I tried once, and I failed. The man's blackened veins pulsed. Crawling toward his heart, he dropped to his knees, his body nearly giving in, but he pressed the word again through clenched teeth, louder than before. No! The walls shrieked, the air tearing with a sound like metal ripping apart. The boy's form split, shadows spilling out, his eyes blazing brighter. You defy us, then you will be broken. The pale crowd surged forward, their hollow hands reaching to drag him down. The man braced himself, one last shred of willpower burning inside. If he was going to be taken, he would tear them down with him. The man's pulse thundered, every beat fighting against the black veins consuming him. The pale crowd lunged, their hands cold and skeletal, clawing for his flesh. He threw his arms wide, forcing his last strength into the single burning thought. No! The word erupted from him like fire. The shadows shrieked, recoiling as if seared by light. The boy staggered back, his face cracking open like porcelain, darkness leaking out in streams. The figures howled, their whispers turning to screams. The tables splintered, plates shattering, food rotting into ash. The man's body trembled violently, the black veins writhing like snakes under his skin. For a moment, he thought they would tear him apart from the inside, but the flame of defiance flared brighter, and the veins began to burn away, searing out of him in streaks of white heat. The crowd wailed, their forms dissolving, fading into smoke that clawed at the air. The boy's glowing eyes dimmed. You cannot banish us, he rasped. You only delay what is already promised. The man staggered forward, fists clenched, his voice shaking but firm. Then I will delay it forever, the boy screamed, his body collapsing into a storm of shadows. The restaurant walls shook violently, glass shattering, beams cracking overhead. The pale figures shrieked as they vanished, ripped away in the storm of unraveling darkness. And then, silence. The man fell to his knees, gasping, his vision swimming. The restaurant was empty, no whispers, no crowd, no boy, just him, and the endless sound of rain against the windows. But as he pulled himself upright, chest heaving, his stomach sank, the window glass still carried the words, "Do not send us away." And this time, the letters were written in his own handwriting. The man froze at the sight of the words. His trembling hand rose to the glass, tracing the letters. Each groove in the condensation matched his own fingertip perfectly. His stomach twisted. "No, I did not write this," he whispered. But the truth settled heavy in his chest. The whispers were gone, yet something lingered, a pulse beneath his skin, a quiet rhythm that was not his own. The restaurant lights flickered once, humming like a faint heartbeat. He turned slowly, scanning the room. The tables were empty. The chairs were overturned, splintered from the chaos. But one table in the center was perfectly set. A single plate, a single glass, waiting. The man's throat tightened. He stumbled backward toward the door. This time, the exit was there. The handle turned easily beneath his hand. Cold air rushed in, rain splashing his face. Freedom. But as he stepped into the night, a sound followed him, the soft jingle of the restaurant bell. He turned his head. The door swung shut on its own. Through the glass, he saw himself, sitting at that table, pale, still, waiting, and his own reflection smiled. "Do not send us away." Daniel's breath came in sharp bursts. His eyes darted between the cracking glass and the dark hallway that led to the storage room. The voice of the child echoed again, deeper this time, vibrating through the walls. "Do not send us away." The glass finally shattered, but instead of falling, the shards floated in the air like suspended ice. Daniel's reflection stepped through, peeling itself free from the window as if it were a doorway. It was him, yet not him. Its skin was gray, stretched too thin across the bones. Its eyes glowed faintly. Hollow lanterns in a storm. The copy of Daniel smiled. The same twisted grin as before. "You let us in once. That is all it takes." The pale figures returned, filling the restaurant again. Seated neatly at the tables, every face turned toward him, every eye unblinking. Daniel staggered back, his hands trembling. "Why me?" he shouted. The reflection tilted its head. "Because you showed mercy," the old woman's voice hissed from the ceiling, from the walls, from everywhere at once. "And mercy is the only doorway we need." The lights blew out, plunging the restaurant into darkness. The last thing Daniel saw, before the shadows closed in, was his own reflection, smiling inches from his face. Darkness swallowed everything. Daniel's breath echoed loud in his ears, ragged and uneven. He stretched his hands out, searching for something solid, something real. But the floor beneath him no longer felt like tile. It was soft, damp, like soil. The smell of earth was overwhelming. He gasped, choking as if the dirt itself seeped into his lungs. A faint glow appeared in the distance. Shapes emerged from the shadows, one by one. They were not strangers. They were people he remembered. Customers who had eaten at his restaurant, neighbors who had passed him on the street. All pale, all hollow-eyed. Their mouths moved, whispering the same words over and over. "Do not send us away." Daniel stumbled backward, his mind spinning. How are you here?" A small figure stepped forward from the crowd, the boy, but his face shifted, flickering like a broken image. Child, man, old, young, 1,000 faces in one. He reached out a hand toward Daniel. "You will stay with us now, forever." Daniel's legs refused to move. It was as if the soil had risen around his ankles, trapping him in place. The crowd began to close in. Hands reached from the dark, cold and skeletal, clutching at his arms. The whispering grew louder, filling his head, until his own thoughts vanished, and then he felt his voice join theirs. "Do not send us away." Daniel's lips trembled as the words slipped out against his will. "Do not send us away." The moment he spoke, the crowd stopped. Every pale figure froze in place, their hollow eyes fixed on him. A silence fell, thick and suffocating. Then, slowly, they smiled. The boy stepped closer, his shifting face stabilizing into something clear. It was Daniel's own face, but younger, sharper, alive, with something Daniel had long buried, you understand. "Now," the boy said, "you belong here." The soil around Daniel's legs tightened, pulling him down an inch. He struggled, clawing at the ground. But the dirt swallowed him further. The figures began to hum, a low vibration that rattled his bones. The old woman's voice rose above them all, calm and final. "No one leaves after opening the door," Daniel screamed, but the sound came out muffled, as if he were already buried. The soil climbed his chest, cold, heavy, crushing. He gasped for air, but each breath tasted of earth. The boy, his mirror, his shadow, knelt beside him, placing a cold hand on his shoulder. "You will eat here. You will serve here. You will never leave here." The restaurant flickered back into view. The tables, the chairs, the faint smell of food lingering in the air. But Daniel was not behind the counter anymore. He was seated at a table, among them, pale, silent, waiting. And when the bell above the door rang, announcing another late-night visitor, Daniel's head turned with the rest, his lips parted, and with the others he whispered, "Do not send us away." The door creaked open. A gust of cold night air swept into the restaurant. A man in a worn coat stepped inside, shaking rain from his shoulders. He looked around, puzzled by the dim light and the rows of silent customers. Are you still open?" he asked. No one answered. Dozens of pale faces stared back at him, Daniel among them. The man shifted uneasily, his hand hovering near the door again. Something in his gut screamed at him to leave, but before he could turn, the boy appeared from the shadows, small, innocent, smiling. "Of course we are open," the boy said softly. The man blinked, unsettled by the calm voice. The boy stepped closer, motioning to an empty table. "You look tired. Sit. Rest. Just for one night." The man hesitated. His eyes darted toward the pale faces. None of them moved. None of them blinked. Then, Daniel's head tilted, his eyes locking with the man's. His lips curved into a faint, unnatural smile, and in perfect unison, every seated figure spoke. Their voices were flat, hollow, endless. "Do not send us away." The man's breath caught in his throat. He reached for the door, but it slammed shut before he touched it. The bell above rang once, and the sound did not echo. The man rattled the door handle, but it would not move. His pulse hammered in his ears. The silence in the room was unbearable. Every pale figure sat perfectly still, their heads tilted just slightly toward him. The boy's smile widened. "You are safe here," he said. The man shook his head. "No, no, I am leaving." The boy's eyes darkened. "You already came inside." The lights flickered, shadows stretching across the floor like black water. The man backed into a table, knocking over a chair. The sound was deafening in the stillness. Daniel's pale face leaned forward from the crowd. His lips parted slowly. Voice low, mechanical. "You cannot leave." The figures all rose at once, their movements sharp and unnatural. The man stumbled backward, his breath ragged. "What are you?" he screamed. The boy's expression did not change. His voice carried like 1,000 echoes. "We are the ones who were shown mercy. We are the ones who stay." The windows fogged over. Words scrawling across the glass from the inside. "Do not send us away." The man's knees buckled. He fell against the counter, his chest heaving, and as the crowd closed in, a terrible thought struck him. Every face he saw looked familiar. Not strangers, locals, people he had passed in the town every day. Their lives had not ended, they had simply disappeared. The man's eyes darted from face to face. Recognition hit like a blade. The grocer, the mailman, the old woman who used to sweep her porch, all of them here. All of them pale and silent. "Impossible," he whispered. The boy's voice cut through the air. "It is not impossible. It is inevitable." The crowd stepped closer, their feet scraping against the floor in perfect unison. The man gripped the counter for balance. "What do you want from me?" The boy tilted his head, his smile never fading. "Just one thing. The same thing they all gave." The lights above buzzed, casting sickly shadows over the pale faces. The man's throat tightened. "And what?" "What is that?" The boy's eyes glowed faintly, like embers buried in ash. "Your place at the table." The man staggered back, shaking his head violently. "No, I will not stay. I will not end up like them." The crowd's whisper began, rising in waves. "Do not send us away. Do not send us away. Do not send us away." The sound grew unbearable, drilling into his skull. The man clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices grew louder. The windows rattled. The floorboards groaned. And then silence. The boy was standing right in front of him, so close. Their noses nearly touched. His whisper slid like ice into the man's ear. "You do not get to choose." The man shoved the boy away with all his strength. The small body collapsed to the floor, but it did not make a sound, not a thud, not a breath, nothing. The boy lifted his head slowly, his neck bending too far to the side. A smile spread across his face, wider than before. "You cannot fight what is already inside." The pale crowd began to close in again. Their feet shuffled in perfect rhythm, the sound like bones grinding together. The man's chest heaved, adrenaline surged. He grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the counter and swung it wildly. The nearest figure crumpled backward, but when it hit the ground, the body dissolved into black smoke. The smoke slithered along the floor and rejoined the shadows, reforming into the same pale figure, untouched, whole, smiling. The man's stomach turned, his weapon was useless. The boy stood now, his movements slow and deliberate. He brushed imaginary dust from his clothes and looked up at the man. "You think you are different," the boy said. "You think you have a choice. But mercy binds, and once you step inside, the door is never yours again." The man backed toward the entrance. But the door behind him had vanished. Where it should have been was only wall, smooth, unbroken wood. The crowd drew closer, their whispers vibrating like a swarm of insects. "Do not send us away. Do not send us away. Do not send us away." The man's back hit the wall. He raised the skillet again with trembling hands. And then Daniel stepped forward from the crowd. His pale lips parted, and in a hollow, broken voice he whispered, "Sit down. The table is waiting." The man stumbled backward into the rain, his chest heaving. He pressed his hands against his face, but they felt cold, too cold, like stone. His breath came in sharp bursts, visible even in the warm night air. He dared to look again through the restaurant window. The pale version of himself was still seated at the table, unmoving, unblinking. The reflection lifted its hand, slowly, deliberately, and the man felt his own arm rise without his command. Terror gripped him. He tried to resist, forcing his muscles to obey, but his body betrayed him. Inside the restaurant, his pale twin mouthed the words, "Do not send us away." And outside in the storm, his lips moved the same. The rain poured harder, drowning the streets, but he could not move his feet. He was bound to the door, drawn to it like a moth to flame. The bell jingled again, soft and sweet, though the door remained shut. The sound echoed in his skull until it became a heartbeat, his heartbeat. The man screamed, but his voice did not escape his throat. It echoed instead from inside the restaurant, from the pale figure sitting at the table. The truth struck him with brutal clarity. He was not outside looking in. He never had been. He was already inside, and outside, in the storm, was nothing more than a shell. Empty. Waiting. The man's scream died in his throat, swallowed by the silence of the dining room. He turned in a panic, searching for a way out. The walls pressed closer, the shadows stretching long and crooked across the floor. Every chair, every overturned table, every splinter of wood pointed toward the center table, the one set for him. The pale reflection rose slowly from the chair. Its movements were sharp, deliberate, unnatural. It stepped toward him, though the distance between them never seemed to shrink. Its smile widened. "You welcomed us," it whispered. "You opened the door." The man backed away until his spine pressed against the wall. The reflection tilted its head, and suddenly there were dozens more. Figures peeling from the glass, crawling from the walls, dripping like ink onto the floor, each one a pale version of him. Each one smiling the same hollow smile. Their voices overlapped, a chorus that rattled his bones. "Do not send us away, do not send us away." The air thickened, heavy as tar. His knees buckled. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was his own reflection's hand reaching out. Not to harm, not to push, but to pull him into the chair at the center table, where he belonged. The man's body sank into the chair as if gravity itself had chosen for him. His muscles locked, his breath slowed. The pale reflections encircled the table, their faces identical, their whispers merging into one endless drone. The single plate before him filled itself, steam rising from food that was not food, its smell both sweet and rancid. His hands moved on their own, fingers wrapping around the fork. The reflection across from him leaned closer, its lips curling upward. "You belong to the house now," it murmured. The man's eyes stung with tears as the fork lifted, trembling in his hand. The shadows leaned in closer, pressing against his skin like invisible fingers. The restaurant lights flickered, dimming until the room glowed only with a faint, pulsing light. Each beat matched the rhythm in his chest. The room was alive, and he was part of it. When he blinked, he no longer saw a plate. He saw himself, carved open on the table, and every reflection leaned forward, smiling wider. "Eat." The fork trembled above the plate. The man's breath came in shallow bursts, his body fighting against the invisible grip. But his arm moved anyway, lowering the fork toward the steaming food, toward himself. The room pulsed with a low hum, like a heartbeat buried in the walls. The reflections leaned in closer, their eyes gleaming with hunger that was not their own. The man forced his head away, but his vision blurred. His reflection across the table leaned forward, whispering, "You cannot fight what you are." The fork pierced the meat. A sharp pain tore through the man's chest at the same moment, as if the food was not separate from him. He screamed silently, his voice lost to the drone of whispers. The reflections smiled wider. One by one, they sat at the surrounding tables, plates appearing before them. Each plate held a piece of him, each reflection raised a fork, and when the first bite was taken, his body convulsed in the chair. He was being consumed, not from outside, but from within. His last clear thought before the shadows pressed down was not his own voice at all. It was theirs. Soft, gentle, unyielding. "Do not send us away." The man's body shook violently in the chair. Every bite the reflections took drained more of his strength, more of his will. He tried to rise, but his legs felt nailed to the floor. The lights above flickered faster, strobing the room in flashes of white and black. In one flash, he was alone. In the next, the tables were full, every seat occupied by a reflection of himself, hundreds of them, each one chewing, each one smiling. The hum in the walls grew louder, vibrating in his bones. His pulse slowed, syncing perfectly with the rhythm. The restaurant was not just feeding, it was binding him. The man's reflection leaned closer across the table, its voice calm, soothing. You were kind. You opened the door. Now you will never close it again. His vision dimmed, colors draining from the world. His skin paled, his veins turned cold. And when he looked down at his own trembling hands, they were no longer his. They were already theirs. The man's final breath escaped in silence, and then he smiled. The reflection stopped chewing. They all smiled back. The restaurant bell jingled softly, and outside, in the storm, the lights glowed warmer than ever, inviting the next soul to come in. The rain outside softened to a steady drizzle. The restaurant stood quiet, its windows glowing with a gentle golden light. From the street, it looked warm, safe, the kind of place any traveler would step into without a second thought. Through the glass, a figure could be seen at the center table, sitting perfectly still. A faint smile frozen on his pale face. The plate before him was empty now, but another place setting appeared beside it. A fork, a knife, a waiting glass. The bell over the door jingled faintly, though no one entered, and in the silence that followed, a whisper slid across the room. Low, patient, eternal, do not send us away. Outside, in the mist, footsteps approached, unaware, hungry, looking for shelter. The bell jangled again. The door creaked open, and the restaurant welcomed its next guest. The door eased open, rain dripping from the coat of a weary traveler. He paused on the threshold, shaking the water from his hat, sighing with relief at the warm glow inside. The smell of roasted meat drifted to him, rich and inviting. His eyes softened. Finally, a place that felt safe. He stepped inside, the bell above him chiming softly. The sound echoed too long, fading into something more like a heartbeat. The traveler looked around. The tables were empty, save for one at the center. A man sat there, pale and smiling, a place set beside him. The traveler hesitated, but then the pale figure lifted its hand, gesturing gently toward the empty chair. Please, the man's voice whispered, though his lips barely moved. Do not send us away. The traveler's chest tightened, though he could not explain why. He took a cautious step forward. The door swung shut behind him. The bell jingled one last time, and the storm outside drowned into silence. The traveler froze as the silence pressed in. The warmth that had seemed comforting at first now felt stifling, heavy, almost suffocating. The pale man's smile did not fade. His eyes glistened, not with welcome, but with hunger. The traveler's feet moved against his will, carrying him closer to the table. The empty chair pulled itself back with a scrape, waiting. His hand trembled as he reached for it. Every instinct screamed to turn, to run, to escape into the storm. But when he glanced at the door, the handle was already gone. Only smooth wood remained. The traveler's breath quickened, fogging the air. The pale man leaned closer, his whisper soft as a lullaby. You opened the door. You are ours now. The traveler sank into the chair, his body no longer his own. The plate before him filled itself. Steam rose, the reflections stirred, and the restaurant welcomed its next feast. The bell above the door jingled once more, though no one was left to enter.